There's a specific smell to a car auction. It's a mix of cheap coffee, exhaust fumes, and a faint electric tang of desperation. I used to love that smell. To me, it was the smell of opportunity. It was the scent of the American dream, greasy and unapologetic. Now I can't even walk past a used car lot without my stomach twisting into a knot. The dream, it turns out, has a dark and bitter aftertaste. My love affair with cars started when I was a kid. I could name every make and model on the road by the time I was 7. While other kids were playing with action figures, I was building detailed model cars, my fingers sticky with glue, my world a miniature garage of plastic and paint. That passion never faded. I became a master mechanic, the guy everyone trusted. I had a good, stable job at a large dealership service center. The pay was steady, the benefits were solid, my hands were always busy. It was a perfectly sensible life. But sensible doesn't always feed the soul. Every day I'd watch the salesmen on the lot strutting in their cheap suits, peddling overpriced warranties and spinning well-rehearsed lines. They didn't love cars, they loved commissions. They saw people not as fellow enthusiasts, but as monthly payments. I knew with a certainty that burned in my gut that I could do it better. I dreamed of a different kind of dealership, a small, curated lot. A place where every car was hand-picked, personally inspected, and priced fairly. No tricks, no pressure, just honest conversations between people who loved to drive. I wanted to build a business with a soul, a place that reflected my passion. The dream took root and began to grow, choking out the sensible life I had built. My wife, she saw the light in my eyes. She was a planner, a believer in safety nets and 401(k)s, but my passion was a force of nature. I created a business plan that was more of a love letter to the automobile industry. I talked about finding a niche, about building a brand based on trust. I sold her on the vision, on the freedom of being our own bosses, on the potential for wealth that a stable mechanic's salary could never provide. The financial leap was terrifying. It was an all-in bet. We cashed out my entire 401(k), a decade of disciplined contributions gone in a single, heart-stopping click. We drained our savings account, the one we'd been carefully nurturing for a down payment on a bigger house. The final piece was a small business loan that felt like a mountain of steel hanging over my head. I remember signing the loan documents, the banker sliding the papers across the polished table. My hand was steady, but my heart was hammering against my ribs. This was it. There was no safety net. The entire financial history of my family was now riding on my ability to sell cars. I found a small lot on a busy road, sandwiched between a massive, glittering new car dealership and a sprawling, high-volume used car superstore. I saw my location as a strategic advantage. I would be the boutique, the specialist, the David to their Goliaths. In hindsight, I was just a guppy swimming in a shark tank. The first few months were a pure, uncut adrenaline rush. I remember my first trip to the dealer auction as a buyer, not just a spectator. Walking those lanes, the auctioneers chant a hypnotic rhythm, my hand held high for a bid. It was the most alive I had ever felt. I brought back a handful of carefully selected cars, and I spent the next week in my small garage, personally detailing every one of them, making them perfect. The day I hung the grand opening banner, my wife and daughter beside me, was the proudest moment of my life. The sign wasn't just my business name, it was my family name. It was a declaration. And my first sale, I'll never forget it. A young couple buying their first car together. I gave them a fair price, a full tank of gas, and an honest handshake. Seeing them drive off the lot, smiling and waving, was a feeling more satisfying than any paycheck I had ever earned. I was doing it. I was living the dream. I was a businessman, an entrepreneur, a captain of my own destiny. I was so in love with the vision, so high on the initial success, that I ignored the shadows the Goliaths on either side of me were casting over my small, hopeful lot. I didn't realize that in the brutal, high-stakes game of the American car business, passion is the first thing to get crushed under the wheels of the competition. The honeymoon period ended abruptly. The reality of the car business is a relentless, grinding numbers game, and my numbers weren't adding up. The two biggest expenses were the rent on the lot and the floor plan. A floor plan is essentially a high-interest line of credit that allows a dealer to buy inventory. You pay interest on every single car, every single day it sits on your lot. It's a ticking clock. Every unsold car is a bleeding wound in your finances, and my cars were sitting. The Goliaths on either side of me were a constant, suffocating presence. They had million-dollar advertising budgets. Their commercials were on the local news every night. Their ads were all over the radio. I had a few signs and a Facebook page. They had teams of salespeople, finance managers, and 100 cars to choose from. I had me and maybe 15 cars on a good day. People would come to my lot, kick the tires, ask a bunch of questions, get a price from me, and then walk next door to one of the superstores to see if they could get the same car for $100 less. I was becoming an unpaid research assistant for my own competition. To compete, I felt like I had to have the right inventory. That meant going to the auction more often, buying more cars. It was a vicious cycle. The more cars I bought to attract customers, the higher my floor plan payment became. The pressure was immense. Every morning, I'd walk the lot, looking at the cars not with a lover's eye, but with a banker's. This one has been here for 45 days. This one has a soft market. This one I overpaid for. They weren't beautiful machines anymore. They were liabilities. The dream was being suffocated by a spreadsheet. The hours were brutal. I was the buyer, the mechanic, the salesman, the finance manager, and the detailer. I'd be at the auction at dawn, on the lot all day, and in the garage until midnight, trying to fix a minor issue on a car to get it frontline ready. I was running on fumes, fueled by cheap energy drinks and the ever-present fear of failure. I stopped being a husband and a father. I was just a car dealer. I'd come home late, smelling of grease and desperation, long after my wife and daughter were asleep. On the rare nights I was home for dinner, I was a ghost at the table, my mind 1,000 miles away, calculating my monthly interest payments, worrying about a car that had developed a strange engine noise. My wife tried to be supportive, but her support was curdling into a deep, anxious worry. "You look exhausted," she'd say. "Is this sustainable?" Her questions felt like attacks. I'd get defensive. "It takes time to build a business," I'd snap. "I'm doing this for us." But who was us anymore? I barely knew the people I was supposedly doing it for. My relationship with my daughter became a series of broken promises. "Daddy, will you come to my soccer game on Saturday?" "I'll try, sweetie, but Saturdays are the busiest day on the lot." I never made it. The lot always won. To try and break out of the slump, I started taking bigger risks. I'd buy a car with a branded title, a salvage or a lemon law buyback, hoping to fix it up and sell it for a huge profit. Or I'd buy a high-end European car that was out of my usual price range, hoping to land a whale. These were Hail Mary passes, desperate attempts to score a big win that could solve my cash flow problems. But they often backfired. The branded title cars were hard to sell. The expensive European car sat on the lot for months, racking up thousands of dollars in floor plan interest before I finally had to sell it at a huge loss. I was no longer the careful, honest dealer I had set out to be. I was becoming a gambler, and the house was winning. The joy was completely gone. The smell of the auction was no longer the smell of opportunity. It was the smell of fear. The beautiful cars on my lot were no longer objects of passion. They were ticking financial time bombs. The dream was no longer a beautiful vision. It was a relentless, grinding nightmare from which I couldn't seem to wake up. In the car business, there's a term called being upside down. It's when you owe more on a car than its market value. In my third year, my entire business, my entire life was upside down. The debt to the floor plan company had swelled to a monstrous, unmanageable sum. The interest payments alone were more than the revenue I was bringing in. I was no longer just treading water. I was actively sinking, and the weight of the steel on my lot was pulling me under. My desperation led me to a place I swore I would never go. I started to cut corners. That engine noise I would have spent a week diagnosing and fixing a year ago. Now I'd pour in some thick oil to quiet it down, just long enough to get it off the lot. A small rust spot I would have professionally repaired. A little touch-up paint would have to do. I was becoming the very type of dealer I had set out to destroy. Every time I sold a car with a hidden issue, a small piece of my soul chipped away. My name, the one on the sign, the one I had wanted to build a reputation of trust around, was becoming a lie. The pressure to generate cash, any cash, was all-consuming. I started using our personal credit cards for business expenses. A new set of tires for a car went on my Visa. An auction fee went on my MasterCard. I told myself it was a temporary loan, that I'd pay it back as soon as I sold the next car. It was a lie I told myself over and over. The balances ballooned, and the wall between my business finances and my family's finances crumbled into dust. My wife knew things were bad, but she had no idea how catastrophic the situation had become. I was a master of deception, shielding her from the terrifying truth. I'd create doctored sales reports, showing small profits where there were actually gaping losses. I intercepted the mail, hiding the increasingly threatening letters from the floor plan company and the credit card statements with their horrifying balances. Our home life was a war zone. The stress had turned me into an angry, hollowed-out version of myself. Every conversation was a potential trigger for an argument. If she asked about money, I accused her of not trusting me. If she said I was working too much, I accused her of not appreciating my sacrifice. I was so twisted up in my own fear and shame that I had turned her, my biggest supporter, into the enemy. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday morning. It wasn't a dramatic explosion. It was a quiet, clinical execution. A tow truck, sent by the floor plan company, pulled up to my lot. A man with a clipboard and a cold, impassive expression got out. "We're here to repossess the inventory," he said, not even making eye contact. My floor plan, my line of credit, had been revoked. I had defaulted. They were taking the cars. I stood there, frozen, as they started hooking up my cars, my beautiful hand-picked machines, and dragging them away. My inventory, my assets, my entire business was being hauled down the street. The Goliaths on either side had won. David was dead. There was nothing left to do. I locked the door to my small, empty office, got in my personal car, and drove home in the middle of the day. My wife was there. She saw my face, saw the utter and complete defeat in my eyes, and she knew. There were no more lies to tell. The war was over. I sat her down at our kitchen table, and I confessed everything. The floor plan debt, the maxed-out credit cards, the doctored reports, the lies. I told her that my 401k was gone. Our savings were gone. And that the mountain of debt I had accumulated was not just a business debt. Because of the personal guarantees I had signed and the credit cards I had used, it was our debt. We were ruined. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. That would have been easier. Instead, she just looked at me with a profound, heartbreaking clarity, as if seeing me for the first time. "I would have lost the money with you," she said, her voice a quiet, steady tremor. "I would have lived in a tiny apartment. I would have worked 3 jobs, but I can't be married to a liar. I don't know who you are anymore." She was right. I didn't know who I was either. I was a mechanic who couldn't fix his own life. I was a salesman who had sold his family a fraudulent dream. She packed a few bags for herself and our daughter that afternoon. She told me she was going to her sister's house, that she needed space, that she needed to think. But I knew. In the empty space where her car used to be in the driveway, in the deafening silence of the house, I could feel the truth. This wasn't a separation. It was an ending. I had driven my business into bankruptcy and my marriage into a brick wall, all at the same reckless speed. The word bankruptcy sounds like a clean slate, a fresh start. It's not. It's a slow, methodical autopsy of your life, conducted by lawyers and trustees in sterile, airless rooms. It's a public declaration of your failure. Every mistake, every bad decision, every dollar you ever owed is laid bare for the world to see. It's a ritual of humiliation. They took everything. The business was liquidated for pennies on the dollar. Because I had pierced the corporate veil by commingling personal and business funds, they came for our personal assets too. We lost the house. We lost the car. We lost every material thing we had ever worked for. I, the man who dreamed of building an automotive empire, was left with a suitcase of clothes and a bus pass. My life after the crash was a landscape of shame. I moved into a grim, one-room apartment that always smelled of boiled cabbage. My new view was a brick wall. My new soundtrack was the sound of my upstairs neighbors fighting. This was the empire I had built. My wife filed for divorce. I didn't fight it. The lies I had told were a form of adultery, a betrayal of the sacred trust that holds a marriage together. Our marriage wasn't a casualty of a failed business. The failed business was a casualty of a man who had lost his way long before the doors ever opened. My relationship with my daughter was the most painful casualty of all. I was now the every other weekend dad. Our time together was shadowed by the loss of our home, of our life. How do you explain bankruptcy to an 8-year-old? How do you tell her that the reason she can't live with her dad anymore is because he was a fool who chased a dream and drove it off a cliff? You can't. You just try to be present, to rebuild a single brick of trust at a time on a foundation of ruins. I was unemployable. My name was synonymous with failure in the local business community. No one would hire me to sell cars. No one would hire me to manage anything. My confidence was shattered. I felt like I had the word loser tattooed on my forehead. Finally, out of sheer desperation, I took a job that felt like a penance. I became a lube tech at a quick oil change franchise. I was back where I started, but 10 rungs lower on the ladder. I spent my days in a greasy pit under a parade of other people's cars, draining their oil and changing their filters. It was hot, dirty, humbling work. And in a strange way, it saved me. In the pit, there was no room for ego. There were no grand visions of success. There was only the task at hand, the satisfying grip of a wrench, the clean threads of a new oil filter, the simple, honest work of keeping a machine running. I was surrounded by the machines I loved, but with none of the pressure, none of the soul-crushing weight of ownership. I wasn't an entrepreneur anymore. I was just a mechanic. And in that simple, stripped-down identity, I started to find a flicker of my old self. I'm still here in the pit. I'm still paying off the debts that bankruptcy didn't erase. I still live in a small apartment. My ex-wife is a good co-parent, but the warmth is gone forever, and I know I deserve that. My daughter and I are finding a new normal. Our relationship isn't built on the promise of a big house or a fancy vacation anymore. It's built on a shared ice cream cone on a Saturday afternoon, on me actually showing up to her soccer games, on the simple, priceless commodity of my undivided attention. I lost the American dream. I chased it, caught it for a brief, shining moment, and then watched it burn to the ground, taking my entire world with it. The competition didn't just drive me to bankruptcy, it revealed who I really was. A man who valued a dream more than his family. A man who was willing to lie to protect his own pride. The failure of my business was the best thing that ever happened to me. It stripped me of everything and forced me to look at the man who was left. And now every day, in the quiet, greasy humility of the pit, I'm trying to rebuild that man into someone better. Stories only become powerful when they're shared. I've opened up mine, but I'd love for you to share yours too. What did this make you think about? What's the closest thing you've experienced to this in your own life? Write it down in the comments and let's turn this into more than just a story. Let's turn it into a conversation.